I knew that letter was trouble before I even opened it, because when an envelope shows up with the Briar Creek Community Association logo stamped on the front, it never means somebody is sending you a thank you card. It means somebody with too much free time and a laminated rulebook has decided your life is about to get more expensive. And that afternoon, standing barefoot at the end of my dusty driveway with the sun sinking behind the cottonwoods, I held that envelope like it was a rattlesnake pretending to be mail. I had not parked a broken-down truck in the yard. I had not painted my house purple. I had not started raising goats in the cul-de-sac, although, honestly, after what happened, I kind of wish I had. All I had done was live quietly on the last old patch of land in a neighborhood that had been trying to forget what used to be there. So I opened it, and right there in stiff black letters was the sentence that started the whole mess. Your agricultural outbuilding is in violation of community appearance standards. Agricultural outbuilding? That was what they called my father's old smokehouse, like it was some random shed I bought on clearance from a farm supply store. Not the same cedar-sided building my dad and my uncle built in 1974, back when Briar Creek was not a community. It was a gravel road, a feed store, 3 mailboxes, and a lot of people who still waved whether they liked you or not. They said the roofline was inconsistent, the exterior finish was deteriorated, the color was visually disruptive, and my personal favorite, the structure presented a negative aesthetic impact on neighboring property values, which is a fancy way of saying, your family history is making our beige houses nervous. I stood there and laughed, not because it was funny exactly, but because sometimes your brain has to laugh before your blood pressure gets involved. That smokehouse sat behind my place like an old man who had earned the right to lean a little. The cedar boards had gone silver from weather. The tin roof had a few patches that caught the morning sun, and yes, the red trim had faded into something closer to dried clay. But every inch of that building meant something to me. My dad smoked hams in there every winter. My mum hung wreaths on the door at Christmas, and my older brother carved his initials into the inside wall the year he left for the Marines. And after Dan passed, I used to sit out there on a milk crate, just to feel close to him without having to explain that feeling to anybody. But the association did not see any of that. They saw an obstacle, a blemish on the clean little fantasy they were selling to newcomers with stainless steel appliances and HOA-approved mailbox posts. And I guess I should have seen it coming, because Briar Creek had been changing for years, one pasture at a time, one old fence line at a time. Developers swallowing up land and spitting out cul-de-sacs named after the things they destroyed. Willow Meadow Drive, where there were no willows anymore. Orchard Lane, where the last apple trees were cut down before the model home even opened. My property was different. Though I was not inside the neat center of the subdivision. I was on the far edge, where the pavement narrowed and the old road still remembered what it used to be. And I had inherited the house from my mother with a small strip of land that somehow survived the buyouts, mostly because my dad had been stubborn and my mother had been even worse. For years, nobody cared about the smokehouse. Then the houses got closer, the lawns got greener, the porch lights got brighter, and suddenly the old building that had always belonged there was being treated like it had wandered into the wrong room. 3 days after the letter, I got the knock. Not a friendly knock, not a neighborly tap, but 3 sharp hits that sounded like somebody serving papers in a courtroom drama. I opened the door, and there stood Mallory Voss, president of the Briar Creek Community Association, wearing white slacks, a navy blouse, oversized sunglasses, and the expression of a woman who had never once apologized to a waiter. She had a leather folder tucked under one arm and a pen in her hand like she might cite me on the spot. "Mr. Calder," she said, and somehow my own name sounded like a violation coming out of her mouth. I said, "Miss, Voss," which was about as warm as I could manage, and she gave me this little smile. Not a real smile, more like a stapled-on courtesy. "We sent notice regarding the non-compliant structure at the rear of your property," she said. I looked past her at the smokehouse sitting in the afternoon light and said, "You mean my dad's smokehouse?" Her smile tightened. "The document refers to it as an accessory structure." "Well," I said, "the document did not know my father." That was when her eyes flicked up from the folder, and I could tell right away she was not there for sentiment. She was there for submission. "The board has reviewed your property," she continued, "and you have 30 days to either remove the structure or bring it into full visual compliance, including approved siding, approved color, and approved roof material." "Approved by who?" I asked. The Architectural Review Committee, she said. I nodded like that explained something. And how many members of that committee were alive when this building went up? She did not like that. You could see it in the jaw. Just a tiny pinch, like I had stepped on the corner of her authority. Mr. Calder, history does not exempt a property owner from agreed community standards. I leaned against the door frame and said, I never agreed to erase my family because somebody moved in next door and wanted a cleaner view from their breakfast nook. That was the first time her voice lost its polish. This is not personal, she said. And that right there, that sentence, that is always when you know it is personal. Because when people are doing something decent, they do not have to announce that it is not personal. They just act decent. I asked her who complained, and for half a second she looked toward the new house east of mine, the big grey one with black windows and a lawn so perfect it looked computer-generated. That house belonged to Preston and Claire Whitcomb, who had moved down from Raleigh 6 months earlier and had already called animal control about a rooster that lived half a mile away. Preston was a commercial real estate guy, the kind who wore loafers with no socks and said things like maximize the neighborhood profile, and Claire had once asked me, in all seriousness, whether I planned to modernize my property or keep it rustic. Rustic. Like I was running a theme park. Mallory caught herself and looked back at me. The board does not disclose individual complaints, she said. Of course it does not, I said. That would make accountability inconvenient. Her face went still. 30 days, Mr. Calder. After that, fines may begin, and the association may pursue further remedies, and repeated. That sounds almost friendly. If you do not know, it means lawyers. She closed her folder. I would encourage you to avoid escalation. I almost laughed again, because that was the trick. Right there in broad daylight, they create the threat, then warn you not to escalate. They push you toward a cliff, then act disappointed when you mention gravity. But I did not yell. I did not slam the door. I just took the copy she handed me, folded it once, and said, I will look into it. She looked satisfied, like she had just watched the first domino fall. Then she turned and walked back down my porch steps, heels clicking on old wood my father had nailed in place with his own hands. I watched her go, and I remember feeling something strange. Not fear, exactly, and not rage, though both were in the room, waiting their turn. It was more like a cold little click behind my ribs, the feeling you get when you realize somebody has mistaken your quiet for weakness. That evening, I walked out to the smokehouse with the letter in my back pocket and stood there while the sky turned orange over the fields that were not fields anymore. I ran my hand along the cedar, rough and warm from the day, and I found my brother's initials inside the doorframe, still there under a layer of dust. And for a second I could hear Dad's voice telling us to quit fooling around and stack the wood right. I thought about painting it. I really did. I thought about buying new siding, replacing the roof, making it clean enough for people like Mallory Voss to stop noticing it. That would have been easier, cheaper maybe, and definitely quieter. But then I looked at that old building and realized what bothered me was not the paint, or the roof, or even the letter. It was the idea that a group of people who arrived after the story was already written thought they could edit out the parts they did not like, and standing there in that fading light, with the smell of cedar and dust and old smoke still clinging to the boards, I decided I was not going to fight them the way they expected. I was not going to beg. I was not going to rage. And I was not going to let them drag me into some ugly shouting match at the clubhouse under fluorescent lights. If they wanted rules, fine. I would find rules. If they wanted paperwork, fine. I would bury them in better paperwork. And by the time Mallory Voss came back for her 30-day victory lap, I wanted her to understand one very simple thing. That old smokehouse was not the weak spot on my property. It was the trapdoor under theirs. The next morning, I did what every reasonable grown man does when a homeowners association threatens to ruin his life over cedar boards and faded trim. I made coffee strong enough to remove paint, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened a folder I had not touched since my mother died. It was one of those old cardboard folders with the corners soft from age, stuffed with property tax bills, yellowed insurance papers, a few handwritten notes from my dad, and one photograph that stopped me cold. It was Dad standing beside the smokehouse in 1975, one hand on the door, sleeves rolled up, hair dark and messy, grinning like he had just built the Taj Mahal instead of a 12 by 16 cedar box with a tin roof. My Uncle Ray was in the background holding a hammer, looking annoyed. which made sense because Uncle Ray looked annoyed in every family photo ever taken, including weddings and baptisms. I sat there, staring at that picture for a long time, and the anger that had been hot the night before turned into something quieter and heavier. This was not about winning an argument anymore. This was about refusing to let strangers shrink my father down to a violation notice. The first thing I did was call my brother, Nate, who lived in Tennessee and had the emotional range of a fence post unless something involved Dad, tools, or barbecue. When I told him about the letter, he went quiet for about 5 seconds, then said, "They want you to tear down Dad's smokehouse." I said, "Either tear it down or dress it up like a dentist office." He said, "Over my dead body," which was dramatic. But honestly, I appreciated the energy. Nate remembered things I did not. He remembered Dad talking about buying the cedar from a mill outside Green Hollow, remembered the old county inspector coming by after a storm in the 70s, remembered Mum keeping receipts in a blue recipe tin because she did not trust filing cabinets. That sent me into the pantry, then the attic, then a closet that had not been opened since the Bush administration. By noon, my house looked like a paper tornado had hit it. I had boxes everywhere, old albums, tax records, brittle envelopes, even a stack of church bulletins for reasons I still cannot explain. And while I was digging, the Whitcombs drove past twice in their black Range Rover, slow enough that I could feel them looking. On the second pass, Preston actually stopped near the fence line and rolled his window down. "Morning, Elias," he called, using that smooth neighbor voice people use when they're about to be insulting with good posture. I walked out onto the porch with dust on my shirt and said, "Preston." He glanced toward the smokehouse. "Heard you had a little compliance issue." "Little," I said. "That is one word for it." He smiled, and there was nothing friendly in it. "You know, we all have to make compromises when we live in a planned community." That phrase, planned community, made me want to look around and ask what part of his plan included moving next to a property that had been there longer than his last 3 mortgages. Instead, I said, "Funny thing is, I did not move into your planned community. It grew around me." His smile thinned. Property values affect everybody, and there it was, the sacred hymn of people who treat neighborhoods like investment portfolios with mailboxes. I said, "Preston, if your property value depends on my father's smokehouse disappearing, maybe you overpaid." He rolled the window up after that, which I took as a small victory, but it also told me something important. Mallory was the face of this fight, but Preston Whitcomb was the fuel. He had bought the big house east of mine with the backyard facing my land, and from his upstairs deck, he had a perfect view of the smokehouse. To him it was not history, it was a flaw in the luxury experience. By late afternoon, I had enough old paper to prove the building existed decades before Briar Creek had an entrance sign. But proving something is old and proving it is protected are two very different things. That night, I started reading the association documents, all 412 pages of them, which I would not recommend unless you are trying to punish yourself for crimes in a past life. The language was dry enough to turn your tongue into sawdust, but buried in the definitions, restrictions, amendment clauses, and architectural standards, I noticed something that made me sit up straighter. The Briar Creek Covenanters applied to lots within the planned development as recorded in 1998, but my parcel had been annexed into the association later, under a supplemental agreement signed by my mother in 2003 after the developer pressured remaining landowners with road maintenance fees. And in that supplemental agreement, there was a line about existing structures being subject to review only when materially altered. Existing structures, subject to review only when materially altered. I read it 3 times. Then once more out loud, because sometimes legal language only becomes real when you hear it in your own kitchen. They had been acting like the smokehouse was a new offense, something I had built behind their backs. But it was there before the HOA, before the Whitcombs, before Mallory Voth discovered Navy blouses and municipal authority. Still, I knew better than to march into a board meeting waving one sentence around like a sword. Associations love arguing over interpretation, and I did not want an argument. I wanted a wall they could not climb. So the next day, I called the county records office and asked about permits, inspections, tax assessments, anything tied to the structure. The woman who answered, Denise, sounded like she had heard every property dispute in 3 counties and survived them all through patience and peppermint tea. When I explained what I was looking for, she said, "Honey, if it was built in the 70s, half of what you need is probably on microfilm, and the other half is in somebody's basement." but come on down and we will see what ghosts we can find. I liked her immediately. The county records building smelled like dust, toner, and government carpet. Denise led me to a back room with old plat maps and binders so heavy they could be used for home defense. For 3 hours, we traced the property history. There it was in a 1976 tax assessment. Smoke-curing shed, cedar, tin roof, good condition. In a 1981 aerial survey, a little square shadow behind the house. In a 1989 rural heritage inventory, a note about traditional family smokehouses surviving along the old Briar Creek Road corridor. That last one made Denise pause. You might want to talk to the State Preservation Office, she said. I thought you were joking at first. For a smokehouse, she shrugged. People think history has to be mansions and battlefields. Sometimes it is where people cured meat and told lies in winter. That sentence stayed with me. I went home with copies, stamps, certified pages, and a headache, then spent the next 2 days photographing every inch of that building. The hand-cut cedar boards, the blackened beams inside from years of smoke, the old iron hooks Dad used to hang hams, the tin patches where he and Nate repaired storm damage in 1992, the little initials carved in the doorframe. I took measurements. I drew a rough floor plan. I wrote down what Mum had told me about neighbors bringing meat there during hard winters, about Dad trading smoked sausage for tractor work, about the smokehouse being less of a building and more of a place where people came when they needed something. It felt strange, documenting my own memories like evidence, turning love into exhibits, but I understood what I was doing. Mallory and Preston had framed the smokehouse as an eyesore. I was building a different frame. On day 16, Briar Creek sent a reminder email with the subject line compliance deadline approaching. It was polite in the way a shark is polite before it bites. I did not respond. On day 19, Mallory left a voicemail reminding me that failure to act could result in daily fines. I saved it. On day 21, I submitted the preliminary eligibility packet to the North Carolina Historic Resources Division, along with photos, tax records, the Rural Heritage Inventory, and a letter explaining the smokehouse's local significance. Then I waited, which is the worst part of any fight, because action at least gives your panic something to chew on. Waiting just lets it roam the house. During that waiting, the neighborhood started doing what neighborhoods do best, whispering with confidence and no facts. Mrs. Alvarez from across the road brought me banana bread and said she had heard I was being sued. I told her not yet, but thanks for the baked goods in case prison food was bad. She laughed, then got serious and told me her late husband used to buy smoked turkey from my dad every Thanksgiving. I had not known that. Then Mr. Jenkins, who had lived on Briar Creek Road since before anybody called it Briar Creek Estates, stopped by and gave me an old Polaroid from 1982. My dad standing beside the smokehouse with 3 neighbors, all of them holding paper plates, smoke rolling behind them like fog. Every person who came by added a piece I did not know I was missing. That was when I realized Preston had miscalculated. He thought the smokehouse was isolated, just my stubborn little problem, but it had roots under more fences than he could see. On day 25, the official second notice arrived by certified mail. This one dropped the polite neighbor routine. Failure to bring the accessory structure into compliance may result in fines, legal action, and recovery of enforcement costs. Recovery of enforcement costs. That part made me laugh because nothing says community like charging a man for the privilege of being threatened. I spread the letter out on the kitchen table beside Dad's old photograph and the state packet receipt, and for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not because I knew I would win. I did not. But because I knew I had stopped playing their version of the game. Day 27 was a Thursday, grey and wet, a kind of rain that makes old woods smell alive. I was out by the smokehouse checking a tarp over the north side when Preston walked up to the fence in a rain jacket that looked more expensive than my lawnmower. Elias, he said, I hope you are not taking all this personally. I wiped my hands on my jeans and said, there is that sentence again. He pretended not to hear me. Claire and I respect the history of the area. We really do. But there has to be balance. Balance, I said, meaning my history has to balance against your view. He sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. You have to understand, people moved here for a certain standard. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I saw what this was. Not just arrogance, not just money, but fear. The smokehouse reminded him that the neighborhood was not born the day he bought into it. It reminded him that his claim controlled version of the world was built on top of somebody else's ordinary life. And some people cannot stand that. I said, Preston, your standard is not the same thing as value. His face hardened. We will let the board decide that. He walked away, and I almost thanked him, because he had just confirmed what I needed to remember. They were not trying to improve the community. They were trying to edit it. On day 28, at 7:42 in the morning, my phone buzzed while I was pouring coffee. The email subject read Preliminary Determination of Eligibility. I stood there with the pot in my hand, coffee spilling onto the counter because apparently my body forgot how wrists work. I opened it and read the first paragraph once, and again, slower. Based on submitted documentation, the Calder Smokehouse appeared eligible for listing as a local historic resource. Pending final review. Eligible. Local historic resource. Pending final review. Those words were not fireworks. They were better. They were a locked door clicking shut behind the people chasing me. I printed the email, printed the packet receipt, printed the county records, printed everything short of my grocery list, then put it all into a clean blue folder. Day 30 came clear and bright, which felt almost rude, like the weather wanted good visibility for whatever happened next. At 10:13, Mallory Voss stepped onto my porch with 2 board members behind her. Preston Whitcomb standing near the driveway pretending he was just casually present at the exact moment of enforcement. Mallory wore the same sunglasses, same folder, same controlled little smile. Mr. Calder, she said, we are here to confirm whether the structure has been brought into compliance. I looked past her at Preston, then back at her, and said, no, ma'am, it is not. Her smile widened just a little. Then we will proceed accordingly. I said, I figured you might say that, and then I handed her the blue folder. She took it like it might be dirty. What is this? She asked. I said, your problem. Mallory opened the folder with that careful little motion people use when they still believe they are in control. But I watched her face change before she even made it halfway down the first page. Not dramatically, not like in the movies where somebody gasps and drops a glass, but in a much better way. Her confidence just leaked out one quiet second at a time. Her eyes moved over the county assessment, the old photograph, the rural heritage inventory, then stopped on a state letter, and behind her, one of the board members shifted his weight like he suddenly remembered he had left something important somewhere else. Preston was still by the driveway with his arms crossed, trying to look casual, but he had gone very still. Mallory cleared her throat and said, this appears to be preliminary. I said, that is right. Preliminary eligibility for historic resource listing, based on documentation your board did not ask for before threatening fines. She looked up at me over the page. Mr. Calder, the association still has authority to enforce appearance standards. I nodded. Sure, where those standards apply. Then I tapped the folder lightly with one finger, but according to the supplemental agreement my mother signed in 2003, existing structures can only be reviewed if materially altered, and according to the state, this existing structure is now under historic consideration, which means any forced alteration may create a preservation issue. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Sometimes the most satisfying sound in the world is not yelling. It is silence from somebody who came prepared to lecture you. Mallory looked back down, flipping pages faster now, searching for a loose thread. One board member, a man named Alan Pierce who owned 3 golf shirts and one facial expression, leaned toward her and whispered, should we call counsel? That was when Preston finally stepped forward. With all due respect, Elias, he said, and every time somebody starts with all due respect, you can safely assume respect has already left the building. This seems like a technicality. I looked at him and smiled. Not big, just enough. Preston, the entire HOA is a technicality with landscaping requirements. He blinked. Mallory snapped the folder shut. We are not here to debate. No, I said. You were here to enforce. The debate started when you realized enforcement might cost more than obedience. That landed harder than I expected. For a second, the only sounds were cicadas in the trees and a delivery truck somewhere down the road. Then Mallory handed the folder back to me like it had personally offended her. The board will review this matter with legal counsel, she said. I said, that sounds wise. She gave me a look sharp enough to trim hedges, then turned and walked off the porch, the 2 board members following her like backup singers who had lost the melody. Preston stayed a moment longer. He looked past me at the smokehouse, and I could see he still hated it, maybe more now, because before it had only been ugly to him, but now it had beaten him. "You know this does not help the neighborhood," he said. I stepped down onto the porch, close enough that he could not pretend we were having a polite chat across property lines anymore. "No, Preston," I said. "It does not help your view. There is a difference." His jaw moved like he was chewing on 10 things he could not say. Then he turned and walked back to his Range Rover. I watched them all leave, and I wish I could tell you I felt triumphant right away, but I mostly felt tired. The kind of tired that comes after holding your breath for a month. I went out to the smokehouse, opened the old door, and sat on the same milk crate I had been sitting on since Dad died. Sunlight came through the gaps in the boards and thin gold lines, and the whole place smelled like cedar, dust, and smoke that had no business still being there after all those years, but somehow was. I thought about calling Nate, but instead I just sat there for a while, because some moments do not need witnesses. A week later, the final confirmation came. The Calder Smokehouse was officially recognized as a local historic resource, not a shed, not an accessory structure, not a negative aesthetic impact. A historic resource. I read the letter at the kitchen table with both hands flat beside it, and I had this strange feeling that Dad would have laughed himself sick at the idea of his smokehouse becoming important to the state. He built it with borrowed tools and stubbornness. He would have said, "Well, I guess the old girl cleaned up without cleaning up." 2 days after that, the association sent another letter. This one had no threats, no 30-day deadline, no mention of fines, no further remedies. It said the board acknowledged the historic status of the structure and encouraged continued maintenance in keeping with community harmony. Encouraged. I read that word 3 times because it was beautiful. Require is a command. Encourage is a retreat wearing church clothes. I framed both letters, the first violation notice and the final acknowledgement, and hung them side by side in the back room because I believe in remembering the whole story, not just the pretty ending. But the ending was not as neat as people think. The neighborhood split right down the middle. Some folks acted like I had saved a piece of Briar Creek from being sanded flat. Mrs. Alvarez brought another banana bread, this one with pecans, which I took as a promotion. Mr. Jenkins came over with 2 more photographs and asked if I wanted help fixing the old door hinge, not replacing it, fixing it, which mattered. Other people were not so pleased. Claire Whitcomb stopped waving. Preston started planting a line of tall privacy trees along the fence, which I considered a generous donation to both of our happiness. At the next board meeting, Mallory gave a long speech about preserving standards while respecting heritage, and according to Nate, who watched the recording because he enjoys suffering when it is educational, she looked like somebody swallowing a lemon politely. The funny thing is, after the smokehouse got protected, people started seeing it differently. A photographer from the county paper came out one morning and took pictures of the sunrise hitting the tin roof. Kids on bikes slowed down near it like it was part of a ghost story. New neighbors asked how old it was, who built it, whether it had always been there, and I would tell them yes, it had been there before the gates, before the signs, before every street got named after trees the developer cut down. Same building, same peeling trim, same patch roof. The only thing that changed was the label, and that bothered me more than I expected. Because why did it need a government stamp before people can respect it? Why was my word not enough? My father's work not enough? The memory of a place not enough until paperwork made it official? I still think about that. I also think about how close I came to giving in. How easy it would have been to repaint the smokehouse some approved shade of muted clay or coastal taupe or whatever color makes rich people feel safe. Nobody would have blamed me. Most people are too tired to fight every little battle, and that is exactly what systems like this count on. They do not always win because they are right. Sometimes they win because they are inconvenient to challenge. That is the part I want people to understand. I did not beat Briar Creek because I was louder, richer, or tougher. I beat them because I slowed down long enough to ask where their power ended. And once I found that line, all their polished letters and confident voices started looking a lot smaller. The smokehouse is still there now. The cedar is still silver. The reef still complains when it rains. My brother's initials are still carved inside the doorframe. And every now and then, when the evening light hits just right, I can almost see Dad standing there, sleeves rolled up, proud of a building nobody was supposed to care about until somebody tried to erase it. So I will leave you with this. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have fixed it just to keep peace with the neighbors, fought the HOA head-on, or gone digging through old records until you found the one truth they could not bulldoze? And maybe the harder question is this: when does protecting a community become controlling it, and who gets to decide what is worth keeping? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I know some of you will say I was stubborn, some of you will say I was right, and a few of you probably sit on HOA boards and are already typing angry paragraphs. Either way, I want to hear it. And if this story made you think of a place, a building, or a memory somebody tried to call ugly just because it did not fit their version of perfect, share this video with someone who would understand, because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not tear something down, it is prove why it should have been respected all along.